fetus and fetu 10-year-old boy pregnant with his parasitic twin PT. Serious doctors of Reddit, what is the rarest disease you have encountered in your career? Rare and interesting would be pentalogy of Cantrell, which has the heart outside of the chest because the sternum has not fused. He'd seen it before with just a bit of the heart on view, but with this kid it was completely out. You could see pretty much the whole heart with the aorta and lung vessels, all that was holding it, the heart just beating away. I done adult cardiac for a bit, but this was a little different. Tiny. We covered it with a polystyrene cup, until the kid went or theater to have it pushed back inside. It meant to be 1 to 65,000 live births. Cuda saber. It a rare form of scleroderma that makes your skin looks like you been cut by a knife down the center of your face. This poor lady mandible actually split in half. The rarest I've encountered is kid syndrome keratitis ichthyosis deafness. A 5-year-old, very sweet, blind girl who literally had rough, thick, opaque skin on the surface of her eyes. Gorham disease aka vanishing skull syndrome. A softball-size area of my patient's skull disappeared and left behind a soft spot. She ended up with a plastic plate to protect her brain. Crazy disease. Edit, I changed brains to brain. I used the plural in just as brains can be used when referring to dissected brain tissue. Pseudochiasis or hysterical pregnancy, in a woman who was an inmate in the psych wing of a prison I rotated through. She thought she was pregnant with Jesus's triplets and had grown a massive pregnant-looking belly, was producing milk, etc. Harlequin ichthyosis. In med school there was a baby born with this. Basically their skin scales up and peels, removing that very important barrier, so kids born with this don't live long. She was just a couple months old and had not yet left the hospital since birth. I have a co-worker with ichthyosis. She has no fingerprints and her skin is scaly. She is also completely bald and very pale. Most people don't know because she wears makeup, wig and gloves. But I taught a fingerprint class one time and she mentioned it and we did a little print thing with her and it was cool. My son has lamellar ichthyosis, which is already pretty rare, affects 1 in 600,000 people. But that not the wild part of our story. We needed a donor egg to get pregnant, so we had to get my husband genetically tested. Learned he a carrier for LI, it recessive, and just said, "K, we'll just find a donor who not a carrier." We find a donor, have her specifically tested, and she comes back non-carrier. We get pregnant, baby is born wrapped in collodion membrane. I gave birth at a renowned teaching hospital in a major US city, none of the doctors had seen it before. But that not the wild part of our story, either. We had my son genetically tested and boom, he has lamellar ichthyosis. He inherited one mutation from my husband and another from the donor. Which should have been impossible, we had her tested. She was and a carrier. Thinking we maybe got the wrong eggs, or some other mix-up, we called the egg bank. They test our donor again. She comes back as non-carrier, again. Now the egg bank geneticist is curious. He calls the donor, had her tested a third time, and they finally discover a VUS variant of unknown significance. Her variant matches my son's second mutation. Mystery solved, except geneticist does a little more digging. The donor my son mutation has only been recorded one other time, ever. Thanks to my son, they now reclassify the variant as pathogenic. So my son has an already rare disease, with a variant the medical community has only seen 3 times now, worldwide, as has never previously caused disease. His chance of being born affected was 0.0098. We had a patient once, a young girl, who was so sick that it broke our data analysis pipeline. When the code ingested a genome sequencing sample, it attempted to detect the chromosomal sex of the patient. It was using 2 metrics. The sample was considered female if it 1, lacked Y chromosome, and 2, was heterozygous on X chromosome, implying there were 2 copies of it. Otherwise the sample was considered male. This one sample registered as female on metric 1 no Y chromosome but male on metric 2 very little heterozygosity on X chromosome, which was not anticipated and resulted in our pipeline crashing. Upon investigation, it turned out that the parents of that poor girl were brother and sister to each other. As a result, she had very little genetic variation throughout her genome, not just X chromosome, and was consequently very sick, with a plethora of diseases typical for consanguineous births. Yes, it is. And to be honest, working in clinical genetics in general was a bit of a scarring experience for me in some respects. Once you start to learn the incredible diversity of genetic diseases of which there are many thousands, and how terrible their symptoms can be. It's like, you're working with the databases and the lists of diseases, and you read the symptoms, and it's all just some data to you. But then at some point you think, odd, there are actual people who have to suffer their whole lives with this. And for most of them, there isn't even a cure yet, not even something to make the patients' lives easier. And this broke my heart quite. Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva FOP. A disease that calcifies soft tissue and turns it into bone. When I was a medical student, our group cadaver had this disease. During dissections we sometimes would get poked by spiky pieces of bone in random areas of her body. Also had a spine that resembled a small turtle shell. I scrolled the thread looking for this as my sister has FOP. She now 36 and a lot more is known about the disease than when she was a child. Lack of information in her youth led to several misdiagnoses and attempts to treat or operate actually cause flare-ups which can quicken spread. Brazilian doc here. I live in a really poor part of an already poor country. When I was in my pediatric internship there was this baby with hepatomegaly big liver. In my region, the first thing that you have to think about in this case is a disease called Kala-Azar, also known as black fever or visceral leishmaniasis. It is an endemic disease which there is a parasite transmitted by a mosquito that can infect people with compromised immune system like people living with HIV and kids. This parasite infects the bone marrow and simulates clinical signs of acute leukemia, like chronic fever, spontaneous bruises and bleeding. The patient develops anemia, leukopenia, low white blood cells and low platelets. To compensate, some organs like liver and spleen take care of the bone marrow function to create new blood cells, and thus, get bigger. This disease is really common in my region, but really rare in other parts, especially non-tropical countries like the US. Anyway, as I was saying, this baby girl, about 1-year-old, was admitted to investigate a hepatomegaly. But the catch was that she kept having those episodes of hypoactivity and sleepiness, and sometimes even faintings that would then get better after she was being breastfed. We then checked and saw that she was having lots of hypoglycemia episodes. Her lab was normal, and she had no other clinical signs that would remind of Kala-Azar, besides the hepatomegaly. The patient had HERS disease, a genetic disorder that makes you produce less glycogen due to an enzyme defect. Never hear of it before meeting this patient, and I think I'll never will meet other one. Interestingly enough, in the same time, I had a patient that was admitted with leukopenia, anemia and low platelets that was also hospitalized to rule out Kala-Azar, but he actually had Fanconi anemia, and also really rare genetic disease. In this one, the bone marrow slowly stops producing blood cells. Besides this, the patient also has kidney, facial, bones malformation and overall physical underdevelopment. Edit, lots of you asking how they turned out. My internship ended before I could have a better follow-up, but the little girl was managed as outpatient, with hypercaloric diet. I haven't seen her, but once you have the diagnosis you can control with dietary intervention and clinical follow-up. The little boy was enlisted in the National Bone Marrow Transplant System. Don't know what turned out of them today, but I also hope that fetus and fetu 10-year-old boy pregnant with his parasitic twin PT. Edit, case 10-YO boy came in with enlarging abdominal mass and intermittent generalized weakness. Imaging revealed a parasitic fetus which was also growing in size. History revealed mass noted 2 years ago which enlarged rapidly the last 3-4 months. Within days of admission, Boy's organs begin to fail with no apparent reason. He was healthy and eating well when he was admitted. Family wanted surgical intervention to separate the parasitic twin. Against surgeons' advice, parasitic twin was basically starving, poisoning the boy to death. Surgeons opened the boy up and found that the boy and parasitic twin share a stomach, liver, heart, blood vessels, mesodermal organs, basically too complex to operate. The boy passed away after. This happened to a poor family in an underfunded government hospital in a corruption-infested country. The parasitic twin was donated to the hospital. It had teeth with hairy limbs with the longest curved baby nails. I can't describe it further. It is on display at the surgeon's hall. Edit 2. This happened years ago before the age of smartphones. The hospital team tried to have the tissues studied for academic purposes. There was a case report about it presented in a local medical congress, but as this happened in a third world country with limited resources, nothing came of it. I live and work in a different country now. Last edit, NSFW. If you want to use transcendents will correct me, but long story short, one of the reasons having twins isn't more common, is because when we're a very small amount of cells, we kinda absorb our twin. This doesn't go anywhere beyond that because they basically disintegrate. A step above that is chimerism, where both grow in harmony as kind of one being, different cells, different DNA, different characteristics, but they work together. But then there is when the would-be fetus just kinda stays there, inside, growing from your bloodstream slowly but surely like a self-contained, malformed tumor of nails, teeth, bones and hair. Edit. After so many people trying to point out it was not a twin, I decided to hunt for the name of the documentary that I watched when I was 8, since I could be very wrong on the descriptions, but nope, the fetus was even trying to make limbs. Tumors don't tend to do that on their own. A fake. I couldn't find a name of the documentary, but it was on the Discovery Channel. The name of the boy was Alamjin Madalev. They even cut it in half to explain it. Oh right, if this is freaking you out, then you might not want to check Craniopagus parasitique. Maybe not the rarest, but saw a 4-5-year-old patient with Lesch-Nyhan syndrome on my PEDS rotation in med school. It an X-linked recessive disease that a quick Google search tells me affects about 1 in every 400,000 individuals. It due to a mutation in an enzyme involved with DNA recycling. The thing all med students remember about it is, for whatever reason, these patients have a tendency to self-mutilate. My specific patient had to have a procedure to have all his teeth removed because he would terribly bite his arms unless he was physically restrained. I believe he had an older brother that went through the same ordeal. So sad, but definitely one of the more memorable cases from med school. Walking corpse syndrome, coder delusion. 17 years in mental health and I seen it once. The belief that some or all of you is dead. The guy was so certain he was dead he believed he was a zombie. Eye doctor here, patient had bilateral acanthamoeba keratitis. Estimated that 0.0004% of contact lens wearers will be diagnosed with this condition in one eye. My patient had it in both. Acanthamoeba keratitis is a rare parasitic infection of your cornea. Edit. I didn't think this would get that much attention. My patient presented after coming back from vacation complaining of a little hazy vision and his eyes feeling a bit off. His cornea looked pristine, but I did note a little ocular inflammation. Turns out he had an underlying autoimmune condition, ankylosing spondylitis, known to cause ocular inflammation, uveitis, and recently stopped taking his medication, so I thought this was a slam dunk case. When he came back for his follow-up, we realized this was not a slam dunk, and we sent him out to a corneal specialist ASAP, and now he is back to 20/20th vision in each eye. His case ended up being caused by wearing his contact lenses while swimming in a lake. Remember, don't sleep, shower, or swim with your contact lenses on, and make sure to visit your eye doctor for regular checkup. On my OB rotation during your residency, I helped deliver a baby who had spots all over. Further blood testing revealed the baby had developed leukemia while in the mother. Didn't know that was really possible prior to that day. Incredibly rare. My colleagues had a patient with catecholamine-induced ventricular tachycardia. AKA every time this 13-year-old exercised vigorously or even got too scared, the adrenaline would induce a deadly arrhythmia that needs to be shocked before long in order for him to survive. Seriously. Objective tinnitus. I could lean close to the patient ear and hear a ringing noise coming out. Central deafness. Patient had an anoxic brain injury and was essentially deaf even though there was nothing wrong with his ears. Edit. I went to bed and this blew up. Thanks for the awards. To answer some of the questions below, the objective tinnitus was following an ear surgery. The patient's middle ear muscles were twitching constantly, causing a ringing sound, and her eardrum was acting like a speaker so we could hear it outside her head. This does not happen often and I will probably never see it again. I don't know what ended up happening with her, but I think the ed did some revision to try to fix it. This is very different than subjective tinnitus, the normal kind where the ringing is only heard in your head. That is caused by a lot of different things, but we generally don't know why it happens and don't have a lot of great ways to fix it. The central deafness happened when oxygen deprivation damages the auditory areas of the patient's brain. He could not hear anything, could not understand speech, relied on writing and lip reading to communicate. Interestingly, he also had some noticeable trouble with his speech. He had what we call deaf speech. That is the particular type of articulation errors we see in patients who are deaf. Even though he was an adult when this happened, he also had a lot of memory problems. After several years of rehab and treatment, he regained a fair amount of hearing. A dermatologist here. Some fun ones: chromhidrosis, where sweat comes out in different colors. My patient was blue. Argyria, a permanent discoloration from silver overdose. Aquagenic urticaria, an allergy to contact with water. Aquagenic urticaria, an allergy to contact with water. How do you even live with this one? Is it skin contact only? How do you bathe? You can drink uncomfortably, but contact with water causes itching and hives. Adding another thing to my list of stuff to be thankful for. Actual scurvy. Poor old man didn't know how to cook after his wife died and ate nothing but biscuits. God, this makes me worry about my own pops. After the divorce, he basically subsides on hot dogs, chips, and uncooked ramen. Every time I cook for him, he reacts like I just gave him a 3-star Michelin meal, even when it's something as basic as quick spaghetti that I still can mess up. Edit. Thanks a million for the words of kindness and solid advice, people. I truly love you for it. The answer is a multivitamin. We should get our nutrition from food, but in this case something is better than nothing. Convinced my crazy grandpa to start taking one by telling him it would piss doctors off cause they wouldn't be able to make any money off. Persistent genital arousal disorder. Having multiple orgasms a day, at any time, without any stimulation, becomes quite bothersome and uncomfortable, limits your daily activities and sleep is interrupted. Over time, patients can become very hopeless. It is remarkable the dissonance between the name and the obvious joke, and the tremendous suffering these patients endure. Alpha-gal tick-borne disease that makes you allergic to red meat. Spongiform encephalopathy, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease,